When your own daughter tells you you're not welcome, it doesn't just sting, it cuts into the very core of who you are. And when I heard her words on that recording, I knew life as I'd known it was about to change. It was an ordinary afternoon, the kind you don't expect to remember. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, the hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, and the sunlight spilled across the table in slanted golden beams. I had a mug of coffee cooling in front of me, half drunk, when my phone buzzed. A new message. From Emily. My heart lifted immediately. At 58, there aren't many surprises that make you smile, but hearing from my daughter always did. She didn't call often. Life with Mark, her husband, seemed to pull her into his orbit more and more, but every message was a reminder that she was still my little girl somewhere under all that adulthood. It wasn't a text. It was a voice message. I tapped play, expecting a cheerful hello, maybe details about the family trip we'd discussed. I'd been holding on to that thought, flying with them, making new memories, finally feeling included after years of standing on the edges of their life. Instead, her voice filled the room, hesitant, trembling with discomfort. "Dad, you won't be flying with us. Mark doesn't want to. He thinks it's better if you don't come." Silence followed. Just a faint click as the recording ended. I sat frozen, staring at the phone like it had betrayed me. The words rang in my head, sharp and heavy all at once. I replayed them, needing to be sure I hadn't misunderstood. The same tone, the same phrasing. Careful. Apologetic. As if she'd rehearsed it, trying to soften a blow that couldn't be softened. Mark doesn't want to. Not I don't want to. Not we can't afford it. Not the timing isn't right. No shared decision, no compromise. Just him. My son-in-law. The man who had taken Emily's hand in marriage and over the years, seemed to take more and more of her life as his own, her time, her choices, her freedom. And now, apparently, her father. My chest felt tight, like something was crushing the air out of me. It wasn't just rejection. It was erasure. From my own family. I thought back to when she was little. Emily with pigtails, running barefoot across the yard, laughing as she held out a dandelion puff for me to blow. Emily wobbling on her first bike while I ran alongside, steadying her with one hand on the seat. Emily in her cap and gown, hugging me with tears in her eyes. And later, Emily in a white dress, her hand trembling in mine as I walked her down the aisle. I had told myself then that I wasn't losing her, only gaining a son. That family wasn't subtraction, it was addition. But now here I sat, alone in a dim kitchen, listening to her voice telling me I wasn't wanted. Not because she didn't love me, but because he didn't. I tried calling her back. The phone rang twice before rolling to voicemail. I hovered over the button to leave a message but couldn't bring myself to speak. What could I say? That I felt like someone had hollowed me out? That her words replayed in my ears like the echo of a slammed door? The house grew darker as the sun dipped below the trees. I didn't bother turning on the lights. I just sat there, phone in hand, listening to the silence that followed her message. The silence of being excluded. Of being dismissed. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. My mind replayed every moment I'd given, every sacrifice I'd made. The long shifts at work, the missed meals, the aching bones from years of labor, all so my daughter could have a better life. And now, at 58, my reward was to be told I wasn't welcome. That I was baggage. That the man who married her had the power to cut me out with a single decision. The bitterness boiled inside me, thick and hot. It wasn't just hurt. It was betrayal. And betrayal has a way of hardening a man, of carving away whatever softness he still has left. As the hours dragged on, one thought rose above the rest, sharp and undeniable. If Mark thought he could erase me from Emily's life, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. When the people you love hurt you, your first instinct is to ask why. But sometimes, the answer isn't given, it's taken. And I was ready to take it. The morning after Emily's message, I woke with the same heaviness I'd carried to bed. My body was sore, But it wasn't the kind of soreness that comes from labor. It was the kind that comes from heartbreak, when your chest feels like it's been hollowed out. I'd slept little, tossing and turning, staring at the ceiling as her words looped endlessly. Dad, you won't be flying with us. Mark doesn't want to. I shuffled into the kitchen, brewed coffee out of habit, but the mug went cold untouched. I sat there at the same table where I'd first heard her message, the morning light creeping across the wood, the clock ticking like it was mocking me. Once, this kitchen had been filled with family chatter, Anna humming as she cooked, Emily telling me about her school day. Now, it was silence and memories. I dialed Emily's number. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same. This time I left a message, though the words came out uneven. It's Dad. I got your recording. I need to hear it from you. Please call me back. Hours passed. No call. By noon I was pacing, the phone clutched in my hand like it was a lifeline. Every photo on the walls became an accusation. There was Emily at age 10, holding up the first fish she ever caught, grinning ear to ear with me beside her. Emily at graduation, throwing her cap in the air. Emily in her wedding dress, her hand trembling in mine as I walked her down the aisle. That day I told myself I wasn't losing her, just sharing her. But staring at that photo now, my chest burned. Had I been wrong all along? My mind kept circling back to Mark. I never liked him. He was smooth-talking, always ready with a joke, but there was something under the surface. Too polished, too controlling. He made decisions quickly and expected everyone else to fall in line. When Emily wanted to spend holidays with me, he always had a reason they couldn't. When I suggested family dinners, he claimed he was too busy. He never argued outright. He just maneuvered quietly, until I ended up left out. But this trip, this was more than inconvenience. This was deliberate. He hadn't said we don't think you should come. He made it about himself. I don't want him there. That stank of something deeper. Was he embarrassed of me? Afraid I'd see something? Or was it about control, cutting Emily off piece by piece until she had no one left but him? I couldn't sit in the dark waiting for answers. A man like me, nearly 6 decades old, doesn't have patience for half-truths. If I wanted answers, I had to take them. I started with an old friend, Mike, a guy I'd known since my working days. He had a way of picking up on things, the kind of man who could sit in a bar for an hour and walk out knowing half the town's business. I called him that afternoon. Mike, I said, forcing my voice calm. You hear anything about Mark? My son-in-law? Mike chuckled low. Oh, him? Yeah, I've seen him at O'Malley's more than a few nights. Likes to drink, likes to brag. Talks louder the more whiskey he's got in him. My grip on the phone tightened. Brag about what? Mike hesitated. Don't know if you want to hear this, Paul. But he's been flashing money he shouldn't have. Talking about keeping the old man out of the way. Folks didn't know who he meant. Guess I do now. My pulse thudded in my ears. Money? Bragging about me? Keeping me out of the way? This wasn't just about a vacation. This was personal. Appreciate it, Mike. I muttered, my throat dry. After I hung up, I sat in silence for a long while. The anger that had been simmering since Emily's message now boiled hot. It wasn't just rejection, it was conspiracy. Mark wasn't only pushing me aside. He was talking about it, proud of it, like it was some kind of victory. That evening, I drove past Emily's house. The street was quiet, the lights in her windows glowing softly. Shadows moved across the curtains, Emily's silhouette, maybe, or Mark's. I parked down the block, engine off, just staring. It felt wrong, sitting there like a stranger outside my own daughter's home. But the truth was harsher. I already was a stranger. Mark had made sure of it. The crowning insult was that Emily hadn't called me back. I knew her well enough to know when she was avoiding something. She wasn't ignoring me because she wanted to. She was ignoring me because he told her to. That realization struck like a hammer. He had taken her voice. He had taken her choice. And now he wanted to take me out of her life altogether. But he didn't know me. He didn't know the man who raised her, who'd worked his hands raw to give her a better life, who'd carried grief like an anvil after her mother's death and still managed to keep standing. If Mark thought he could erase me, he'd learn soon enough that I was no faint shadow to be brushed aside. Because I wasn't going to fade quietly. I was going to find out what he was hiding. And when I did, he'd wish he'd never spoken my name. The funny thing about liars is they always leave something behind, a thread. And once you start pulling, the whole thing unravels. After that night outside Emily's house, I couldn't rest. Sleep wouldn't come, food had no taste. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard her voice again. Dad? Mark doesn't want you to. Not we, not I, but he. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. My daughter's silence wasn't her own. It was his hand over her mouth. The next morning, I started digging. A man doesn't get to 58 without learning how to find answers where others see dead ends. Back in my working years, I'd spent plenty of time reading people, following patterns, spotting lies. Those instincts were rusty, but still sharp enough to draw blood. I drove into town, parked near O'Malley's, and went in around lunchtime. The place was quiet. The air smelled of stale beer and fried food, a jukebox humming low. I'd been there before years ago, but now it felt foreign, like I was walking into someone else's world. At the bar, I ordered coffee. The bartender, a woman named Lisa, gave me a curious look. You're Emily's dad, right? I nodded. That's me. Her lips pressed in. She didn't say Mark's name, but the look in her eyes told me she knew what this was about. He's in here a lot. Talks too much when he drinks. What does he talk about? I asked. She leaned on the counter, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. Money. Deals. Big plans. Says he's gonna take Emily places, but half the time I think it's just talk. Brags about having friends in high places. And sometimes, she lowered her voice, he says things about you. That you're old, bitter, jealous. That you just get in the way. Her words tightened around my throat like a rope. Did Emily ever hear him say that? Lisa shook her head. Not here. He only says it when she's not around. But he says it enough that folks believe it. I left the bar with my stomach in knots. So it wasn't just a private grudge, he was poisoning my name in public, shaping how people saw me. That's how men like him work, isolate, control, destroy reputations until there's nothing left to cling to. That evening, I called Mike again. Keep your ears open. I told him. I want to know every word Mark says when he's out. Mike chuckled. You planning something, Paul? I hesitated, then answered honestly. I'm planning not to let him take my daughter away from me. 2 days later, Mike called back. His voice was low, urgent. You were right. Mark's got something going on. He was bragging to a buddy about a business deal, said he needed Emily to sign off on some paperwork. Sounded like financial stuff. Shady. Like he was hiding it. That hit me hard. So that was it. It wasn't just about a vacation. He didn't want me around because he knew I'd start asking questions. He knew I'd sniff out whatever scam he was running. And maybe Emily, my sweet, trusting Emily, was already tangled in it without realizing. That night I couldn't sit still. I drove past Emily's house again, this time slower, watching. Through the window, I saw her silhouette moving from room to room. Then Mark's pacing, gesturing sharply. Even at a distance, I could see the tension in her shoulders. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. She was trapped, and she didn't even know it. Back home, I pulled out an old notebook, the kind I used to keep during investigations. I wrote his name at the top of the page, Mark. Underneath, I listed what I knew, the bar talk, the money flashing, the paperwork, Emily's message. Piece by piece, a picture was forming. And with each piece, my anger hardened into something sharper. This wasn't just about a family trip anymore. This was about control. This was about my daughter's life. I swore then that I wouldn't sit by another day. If Mark thought he could cut me out and pull Emily under with him, he was about to find out I wasn't just some old man to be ignored. I was her father. And I was coming for the truth. Men like Mark think they're clever, hiding their schemes in paperwork and big talk. But numbers don't lie, and once I started following the trail, I saw just how deep his game ran. After my notebook filled with scribbles and fragments of gossip, I realized whispers weren't enough. Bar talk and speculation could only take me so far. If Mark was up to something, the proof wouldn't be in his words, it would be in his money. And money always leaves a trail. I sat at the kitchen table that morning, the same table where I'd first heard Emily's message, and opened the old leather notebook I hadn't used in years. I wrote Mark's name at the top of a fresh page in big block letters. Beneath it, I listed what I knew. He controlled all the household finances. He flashed money he shouldn't have at O'Malley's. He talked about keeping the old man out of the way. He needed Emily's signature on some paperwork. 4 lines, but they painted a picture: control, deception, isolation. I underlined Emily's name twice, the ink pressing hard enough to tear the page. By mid-morning I knew who to call. Harold. We'd played cards together every other Friday for years, and though he'd retired from the bank once already, he still worked part-time as a consultant. He knew the way money flowed in and out of this town better than anyone. He picked up on the second ring. "Paul. Been a while." "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my tone steady. "Listen, I need to ask you something. It's personal." "Go on." "You seen anything strange with my son-in-law?" "Mark." There was a pause on the other end, the kind where you know a man is weighing his words. Finally Harold sighed. "I can't tell you much, you know that. But I will say this. He's been in the bank more than he should. Loans. Withdrawals. Deposits that don't line up with his income. Always promising money's coming soon. That's the kind of pattern that makes a man look desperate." My grip on the phone tightened. Desperate men make dangerous choices. "Appreciate it, Harold," I said quietly. I sat with that information the rest of the day, my coffee growing cold beside me. My mind kept circling back to Emily. Did she know? Was she already caught in this? I remembered her as a little girl, counting coins in a jar, proud of herself for saving $1. She'd grown up trusting, gentle, easy to convince. And Mark, he would have seen that as opportunity. That evening, I drove past her house again. Her car was parked neatly in the driveway. His truck was crooked beside it, one wheel up on the curb, like he owned the whole damn street. The curtains were drawn, but through a gap I saw movement: Emily, setting something on the table, and Mark pacing, gesturing too sharply. Even from a distance I recognized the posture of a man laying down the law. I parked down the block, lights off, engine idling. The house I used to visit for dinners and birthdays suddenly looked foreign, hostile. My daughter's home had become his fortress. And me? I was the outsider, sitting in the shadows. I thought about Anna, my late wife, Emily's mother. She'd been gone for over a decade, but I could almost hear her voice in my ear: "Don't let anyone hurt our girl. Not ever." I clenched the steering wheel until my hands ached. I had already failed once, letting a man like Mark into her life. I wasn't going to fail again. Back home, I sat at the desk and called Emily. To my surprise, she answered. Her voice was small, cautious. "Dad?" I said gently. "I just need to know, are you all right?" Silence stretched on the line before she answered. "I'm fine. Mark he just doesn't think it's a good idea for you to be involved right now." My throat tightened. That wasn't her talking. That was him, speaking through her. "Emily," I said, forcing calm into my voice, "if he ever asks you to sign anything at all, promise me you'll call me first. Do you hear me?" Another pause. Then, barely above a whisper, "I can't promise that, Dad. Please don't make this harder." And then the line went dead. I sat in the silence, the phone heavy in my hand. That wasn't rejection. That was fear. She was trapped, tangled in something she didn't understand. By midnight, 2 more pages of my notebook were full. Arrows, underlined words, theories. A pattern was forming. Mark wasn't just trying to cut me out of their trip. He was trying to cut me out so I wouldn't see the truth, whatever shady business he was dragging Emily into. I leaned back in my chair, the lamp casting long shadows across the room. My reflection stared back at me from the darkened window, older, grayer, but not beaten. Not yet. Mark thought I was an inconvenience. A relic. A problem he could sweep aside. But he had no idea who he was dealing with. Because I wasn't just Emily's father. I was the man who had given his life to protecting her. And I wasn't about to stop now. If you want the truth from a liar, you don't confront him head on. You set a trap, stand back, and let him walk right into it. The night after my call with Emily, I stared at the ceiling until dawn. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard her voice again, strained, hesitant, almost rehearsed. Mark doesn't think it's a good idea. That wasn't my daughter speaking. That was Mark talking through her lips. The thought sickened me. When the sun finally came, I sat at the kitchen table with my notebook and coffee, and I realized I had 2 choices: sit back and watch my daughter get swallowed whole, or move. At 58, I'd already buried my wife. I wasn't going to bury my daughter too, not while I had breath in me. The plan started with information. Gossip was useful, but I needed evidence. I called Mike again. Don't just tell me what he says, I told him. I want to know who he meets, how much he spends, who buys his drinks, what names slip out of his mouth. Write everything down. Dates, times, details. Mike whistled. You're building a case, Paul. That's exactly what I'm doing. That night, I drove to O'Malley's and parked across the street. The bar glowed with its old neon sign, flickering in the cool night air. Cigarette smoke drifted from the back door, laughter and music spilling out every time someone walked in. I sat in the cab of my truck, engine off, eyes on the door. Mark showed up around 8. He strutted across the lot like he owned the place, his truck parked crooked in 2 spaces. He always had that swagger, that air of being untouchable. I watched him disappear inside, then leaned back and waited. 2 hours later, he came out louder, his voice booming across the lot. I cracked the window and listened. Got her wrapped around my finger, he bragged to the man beside him. Signs whatever I put in front of her. Doesn't even look. Can you imagine? She trusts me that much. The man laughed, clapping him on the shoulder. My stomach twisted. I hit record on the small device in my pocket, but the wind made the sound garbled. I needed clearer proof. The next day, I dug through the old desk in my study and pulled out a recorder I hadn't touched in years. It was small, black, no bigger than a lighter. Reliable. I'd used it once on interviews back in my working days. I tested it, the red light flickering, the tape whirring softly. It still worked like a charm. That Friday, I walked into O'Malley's myself. The place hadn't changed in decades. The smell of beer-soaked wood, the same jukebox in the corner, the same chipped bar stools. Mark was already there, sitting at a table with 2 men I didn't recognize. Drinks cluttered the table, his laugh carrying over the low music. I ordered a coffee and took a seat at the far end of the bar, close enough to hear, far enough not to draw attention. The recorder sat in my pocket, running. I kept my back turned slightly, eyes on the mirror behind the counter, watching his reflection. By his 3rd drink, he was holding court. His hands moved wide, his voice full of that smug pride. Once she signs the last form, it's done. House, car, all in my name. She never even reads the damned things. Just smiles, trusts me, and signs. Can you believe that? The 2 men laughed, raising their glasses. Mark leaned back, grinning like a king on his throne. Her old man would lose his mind if he knew. That's why I'm keeping him out. He's nosy. Too damn nosy. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt, but I didn't move. I just let the recorder do its job. I stayed another 20 minutes, long enough to catch him bragging about connections and money coming soon. Enough to paint a picture of a man building castles on sand. Then I left, quiet, unnoticed. In my truck, I replayed the recording. His voice came through clear, every word sharp as a knife. Proof. Not just suspicion. Not just whispers. Proof. Back home, I spread my notebook on the table, the recorder beside it. The tape whirred as I played it again, writing down every line word for word. Above me, Anna's picture watched from the shelf. I could almost hear her voice, "Protect our girl." I sat there until the early hours of morning, my notes covering page after page. For the first time since Emily's message, I felt something other than despair. I felt control. I had the evidence. I had the rope. And all I had to do now was tighten it. The hardest part about showing someone the truth is that they don't always want to see it. And when I laid the evidence in front of my daughter, I realized Mark had already poisoned her against me. The recorder sat on my table for 2 full days before I made my move. Each morning I replayed it, Mark's voice echoing in my kitchen like a snake hissing in the walls. Once she signs the last form, it's done. House, car, all in my name. Old man's too nosy. I imagine Emily's face every time. Shock first. Then anger. Maybe tears. But always understanding. I told myself that when she heard it, when she saw what kind of man she was married to, she'd run from him straight into the safety of truth. That belief was the only thing that kept me steady. By Sunday, I couldn't wait any longer. I drove to her house, my hands gripping the wheel tighter than they should have, the recorder heavy in my pocket. The closer I got, the more my heart pounded, not from fear of Mark but from the ache of facing my own daughter, a daughter who'd already pushed me away once. The street was quiet when I pulled up. Kids' bikes lay scattered on lawns, a sprinkler hissed lazily across the neighbor's yard. Ordinary suburbia. But the house in front of me felt like hostile territory, a fortress built by Mark to keep me out. I walked up the drive and knocked. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the door opened, and Emily stood there. My breath caught. She looked older than I remembered, tired, shadows under her eyes, but in that instant I still saw the little girl who used to run to me after school with scraped knees and stories to tell. "Dad?" she whispered, glancing behind her. "You shouldn't be here. If Mark sees—" I raised a hand. "I don't care what Mark thinks. Emily, I need 5 minutes. That's all. Just 5. She hesitated, then stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door closed behind her. The summer air was warm, but her arms folded across her chest as if she were cold. I pulled the recorder from my pocket and pressed play. Mark's voice spilled out, slurred but clear. She never even reads the damn things. Just signs. Her old man's too nosy. That's why I'm keeping him out." Emily's eyes widened. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God!" I stopped the tape. My own voice shook with urgency. "You see? He's not protecting you, Emily. He's using you. He's putting everything, the house, the car, in his name. He's setting you up to lose everything. This is who he really is." For a moment, I saw it land. Her eyes filled, her shoulders trembled. The truth was right there in front of her, undeniable. But before she could speak, the door creaked open. Mark stepped out, wearing that smug half-smile I'd come to hate. "Well, well? Look at this. A little father-daughter porch talk?" His eyes flicked to the recorder in my hand. "What's this, Paul? Spying on me now?" I stood tall. "Not spying. Recording the truth." Emily shifted between us, her face pale. "Mark, he played me something." Mark cut her off with a laugh. "Oh, I bet he did. Snippets, half-sentences? Probably edited. You really think this man, your father, hasn't been against me from day one?" He stepped closer, his tone dripping with mockery. "Emily, he hates that you're not his little girl anymore. Hates that you chose me. So now he's playing detective, twisting things to tear us apart. That's not true, I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. Emily, you heard it yourself. Those were his words, not mine. He's been bragging about controlling you. About cutting me out. Don't let him gaslight you. But Mark wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her against him. His eyes locked on mine, cold and triumphant. She knows better. Don't you, baby? He's just bitter. Obsessed. Always needing to be the hero. He'd rather destroy your marriage than admit he's not the center of your world. Emily's lips trembled. Her gaze darted between us, torn and trembling. Dad? She shook her head, tears spilling. I don't know what to believe. I stepped forward, desperate. Believe your ears, Emily. Believe what you heard. I'm not your enemy. I'm your father. I've spent my life protecting you. Please don't let him blind you. But Mark tightened his grip, his voice soothing as poison. You don't have to listen to this, baby. He's sick. He'll never stop until he tears us down. Let's go inside. Emily's eyes brimmed with tears. She looked at me once more, and in her face I saw a storm, love, fear, doubt. Then, softly, she said, Dad, please go. The words hit harder than any punch I'd ever taken. Mark smirked over her shoulder as he guided her inside, mouthing 2 words at me before the door closed. You lost. I stood on that porch, the muffled sound of my daughter crying just beyond the walls, the recorder still buzzing faintly in my hand. For the first time, I felt the weight of real defeat. But as I walked back to my truck, a cold clarity settled over me. No. I hadn't lost. Not yet. Mark had just raised the stakes. And if he thought I'd back down now, he was about to learn what kind of man he was really dealing with. They thought pushing me out meant I'd give up. But the thing about being underestimated is, it gives you room to work in the shadows, and that's where I do my best work. The drive home from Emily's house felt longer than it should have. The streetlights blurred past, but my mind was somewhere else, stuck on the sound of her voice telling me to leave, stuck on the sight of Mark smirking as he pulled her inside. Every second replayed in my head, sharper, crueler. When I got home, I poured myself a drink, something I hadn't done in months. The whiskey burned all the way down, but it didn't dull the ache in my chest. For a few hours I just sat there in the dark, listening to the silence of the house, the old clock ticking on the wall. But somewhere in that silence, the anger started hardening again. Not the wild, frantic kind I'd felt on the porch. This was colder. Focused. Mark had won a round, nothing more. He'd turned Emily against me with words, with poison. But I still had what he didn't: patience, experience, and time. So I opened my notebook again. Flipped back through the pages I'd already filled with names, dates, and scraps of evidence. The recorder sat beside it, a reminder that the truth was still mine. I wrote 1 word at the top of a clean page: leverage. If Mark wanted to play games with money, I'd bury him in his own debts. If he wanted to lie, I'd put his lies on paper and shove them under the right noses. The next morning, I started with Harold again. We met at a diner on the edge of town. The place smelled like bacon grease and coffee grounds, but the booth was quiet and private. You were right, I told him, sliding into the seat. He's pulling her into his mess. I need more. I need specifics. Harold stirred his coffee slowly. Paul, you're asking me to cross a line. I leaned forward. I'm asking you to help me save my daughter before she loses everything. You know what it's like to watch someone you love walk into a trap. Don't let me watch it happen. For a long time, he didn't speak. Then he sighed and opened his briefcase. From it, he slid a folded piece of paper across the table. This fell into my hands. Mark applied for another loan last week. He used Emily's name as a cosigner. She probably doesn't even know it yet. I unfolded the paper. My daughter's signature stared back at me, neat, careful, and completely unaware. My chest tightened. He's drowning, Paul, Harold said quietly. The man's juggling accounts like a circus act. One bad move and it all collapses. And if it does. He tapped the paper. She goes down with him. I tucked the document carefully into my notebook. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From rage. The next step was surveillance. If Mark was meeting people, making deals, I needed to know who. I drove past the bar more often, but I also started checking other places. A small office building downtown, a strip mall cafe where men in suits lingered too long. I kept notes on times, license plates, patterns. One night I followed him. He left the bar just after 9, swaggering to his truck. I stayed a few cars back as he drove across town to a rundown warehouse near the river. He parked, went inside. I waited. 20 minutes later, he came out with 2 men I didn't recognize. They shook hands, exchanged envelopes. Mark left grinning. I wrote it all down. Date. Time. Description. The whole thing. Back home, I pinned the notes on the wall above my desk. The picture was forming, piece by piece. Mark wasn't just reckless with money. He was dirty. And if Emily ever saw the whole picture, the loans, the fraud, the shady meetings, no amount of his silver tongue could twist it away. But I knew better than to rush. He'd already spun her against me once. If I came at her with half a story, he'd twist it again. No, I had to wait until the net was tight, until every knot was in place. Then I'd pull, and Mark's whole world would collapse around him. I sat back, staring at the web of notes, the evidence building like storm clouds. For the first time in days, I felt calm. Mark thought I'd lost. But the game had only just begun. If you want a liar to trip, you don't shove him. You build a floor he can't see and then wait for him to step on it. That night, he finally did. The wall above my desk had become a map of paper and pins, dates, license plates, names, printed emails, copies of checks. It looked messy to anyone else, but to me it was a machine, parts arranged just so, each cog waiting to turn and set everything in motion. I'd spent weeks following Mark's shadow, and the picture was cruelly clear. He was deeper in debt than he could admit, juggling loans and using Emily's name as ballast. He bought favors, not loyalty. Those favors had faces. I had a few of them in my notes. I needed one more thing, a moment where he betrayed himself in plain view. I called Mike first thing. Tonight, I said without preamble. You still up for watching the warehouse? He didn't hesitate. Paul, I'll do more than watch. I'll make him comfortable. Get me the time and the place. We worked the plan like an old sting, simple, stupid maybe, but grounded in the kind of patience my years had taught me. Mike would pose as a buyer, the kind who never questioned a conspicuous envelope. Harold would be on standby at the bank to confirm transfers if needed. I'd be the steady eye, the man who'd seen every angle and stayed quiet until the right moment. No theatrics. No speeches. Just evidence gathered solid and cold. Night came like a curtain. The river fog hung low, and the warehouse sat hulking near the docks, a tooth of concrete and rust against the black water. I parked 2 streets over, the engine off, and watched Mark's truck roll up like it belonged there. He hopped out, pockets heavy with swagger. He carried himself like a man who thought he'd already won. I tell you this not because it's rare. Pride makes cowards all the same. It's because it made him predictable. Mike headed inside first, a hat pulled low, wallet fat with a fake name and a deeper confidence than he owned. I followed 20 minutes later, tucking a small recorder into my jacket breast like a second heartbeat. The room smelled of oil and old paper. A single bulb swung slow and cast long shadows, and I had to squint to find Mark in the gloom. He was already there, talking low with a man whose tie was too new for the back alley business we were in. The kind of man who spends other people's money and keeps receipts for favors. I stayed in the shadows near a stack of pallets. The air tasted metallic, a cloying tang that made you blink and feel your mouth fill with it. I could hear Mark's voice first, that smarmy tone he used when he wanted to impress. Everything will be squared, he told the man. You'll get what you paid for. She'll sign when I tell her. Piece of cake. The other man leaned in, handing him an envelope with a slow, careful motion. Paper met paper. 2 palms. The world narrowed to that simple exchange. Mike, who'd been sitting a little to the left pretending to smoke, made a show of standing and moved to pretend to bump Mark. It looked accidental. The perfect moment. Mark turned, irritated, and took the envelope with a sharp little smile. He tucked it inside his jacket as if it were habit, like the action had happened 100 times before and meant nothing. But inside that jacket was the proof I needed: names, amounts, signatures. The kind of things you can't miss here, or edit away. He excused himself to a corner and pulled out a pen. I couldn't hear the words, but I watched the motion, a quick flourish, a signature of consent. He closed the envelope, pockets it, then leaned back to the table with a practiced laugh, the way men do to cover trembling hands. That was our opening. I slipped from the shadows and walked up, calm as if I'd been invited. "Evening, Mark," I said. My voice carried across the concrete like a bell. He started, then masked it with a grin. "Paul. Didn't expect to see you here. Small town, huh?" Mike played his part, casual, conspiratorial. "This place always has surprises," he said, slapping Mark on the shoulder the way criminals do to prove they're brothers. I kept my tone level. "No acting. Truth holds its own weight." "Who was that? You signing something in secret?" I asked, as if foolish curiosity, as if any man would not be curious when paper passed hands in the dark. Mark laughed too loud. "Just business," he replied. "You don't understand how deals work, old man. This is for the better. For Emily." Those last 2 words should have been soft. They were not. They were cocky. He'd used her name as talisman to justify whatever corner cutting he'd done. That was the rot. I'd memorized his tell. When he fibbed, his left eye twitched. It did so now. He was tangled. I watched his jacket bulge where the envelope rested, and I felt the old surge of police training: watch, don't touch, document. I reached unconsciously for the recorder at my chest, then made a decision. We didn't need to seize him right then. The stunner would be the after effect, when Harold confirmed the transfers, when we could show Emily the paperwork, when the web of numbers finally became a noose. So I did the one thing Mark needed to feel safe. I baited him. "You trust him?" I asked, tilting my head toward the man who'd given him the envelope. He didn't hesitate. "Of course. Good money. Clean people." He said it like a prayer. Funny, because good money often wants receipts. I let the line hang. At that, Mark's smile thinned. He shifted, and in doing so the envelope slid a half-inch out of his pocket. Paper caught the bulb's light. The man across from him glanced down and then up, annoyance flickering across his face. "You sure you want to be sloppy?" he hissed. Mark's jaw worked like a machine. He cursed softly, then reached inside and handed the envelope to the man as if he had always meant to. A transfer. A signature. A promise. I saw the man flip it open, thumb skimming papers. His face hardened, then something like surprise softened the edges. It was the smallest thing, a number circled, a date changed. But to me it looked like a confession written in ink. We left separately. No scenes, no shouting. The night had already done the work, and we had what we needed: names on paper, a recorded exchange, a witness who'd seen envelopes pass hands in the dark. Back at my truck, I played the small clip of Mark's brag into the recorder. "She'll sign when I tell her." It was short, but enough. The rest would live in the paperwork. 2 days later Harold called me at dawn. "They moved funds last night," he said. "Small amounts, but consistent. There's a chain. Follow it, and you find a name tied to offshore accounts. You want me to make it official?" His voice was flat. This was the legal lever. This was the thing that made reputation into criminality. I felt something in my chest that wasn't victory so much as relief. The net tightened in invisible ways. Men like Mark assume they can buy silence, bend truth, keep the people they love from seeing. But paper has a long memory, and so do people who know how to read it. There was still the matter of Emily. No amount of documents would make her see the way we did. She'd been poisoned with words by a man she trusted. But the papers would give her a choice she couldn't argue away: signed forms, bank records, witnesses. The truth, finally, would be something she'd have to touch, not just hear. I left the warehouse that night with rain on my face and the sound of water like applause on the pavement. The plan was working. The net was not yet tight enough to pull him in cleanly, but the knots were set. He'd stepped where he shouldn't have. Now the slow part began, the legal part, the exposing part, the part where a man's life is unwound and every stitch he'd used to bind another is shown in the light. Mark had been confident. He'd been loud. He'd been careless. He'd never met patience like mine. Every man has a limit. Mark thought mine was being humiliated on my own daughter's porch. He didn't realize I was only getting started, and his breaking point was closer than he ever imagined. The wall in my study had turned into a battlefield map. Notes, photocopies, arrows and red pen, every scrap of information I had on Mark pinned in neat rows. I'd stare at it late into the night, glass of water in one hand, pen in the other, trying to connect the pieces. It was all there, the loans, the signatures, the shady meetings by the river. He wasn't just reckless, he was cornered. And cornered men make mistakes. But what kept me awake wasn't the paperwork. It was the picture of Emily taped right at the center. Her graduation photo, her smile full of pride. I'd catch myself looking at it, and whispering promises to her. I won't let him take you down. I'll drag him into the light before he drags you into the dark. So I watched. Every night I tailed him from a distance. Mark was a creature of habit when drunk. He'd swagger out of O'Malley's, phone glued to his ear, talking louder than he thought. One Tuesday, I caught his voice sharp in the cool air. I said I'll have it this week. She's signing. I don't care if she doesn't like it. You'll get your money, now back off. His hand shook when he hung up, the cigarette between his fingers trembling. He glanced around like a hunted man, not realizing I was just across the street, hidden in shadows. I wrote it all down. 2 days later, he met the same two men I'd seen at the warehouse. This time at a dingy cafe on the edge of town. I watched from my truck as he slid into the booth, his knee bouncing under the table. One man leaned in, speaking low, and I caught enough through the open window. You think we're patient? You think she's gonna save you forever? Mark's reply was muffled, desperate. She'll sign. I'll make her sign. Just give me until Friday. I wrote every word in my notebook, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. Back home, I spread the notes across the table, building the timeline. Friday was the deadline. That's when the real pressure would hit. I called Harold again. You watching the accounts? Yes, he said, his voice grim. He's pulling cash like a drowning man grabbing at branches. It won't hold. And Paul, Emily's name is on 2 of those loans. If the bottom falls out, she gets dragged under. The thought nearly broke me. My daughter, my little girl, tied to men who would crush her without blinking. I stared at Anna's picture above the desk, my wife's gentle smile frozen in time. What would you want me to do? I asked her silently. The answer was clear. Protect our girl. That evening, I drove past Emily's house. The curtains were open just enough for me to see inside. Emily stood in the kitchen, papers in her hands, her face pale. Mark towered over her, gesturing sharply, his finger jabbing at the page. She shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. He slammed his hand on the counter. She flinched. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. It took everything in me not to storm inside right then. But patience was my weapon. A man like me doesn't play by impulse. He waits for the exact moment his enemy hands him the rope. When Emily walked away from the counter, Mark crumpled one of the papers and hurled it at the wall. He grabbed his phone, stormed into another room. Through the glass, I could see his shadow pacing. He was unraveling, and it was only a matter of time before the seams tore wide open. Back at home, I filled 3 more pages of my notebook. Friday. That was the day he'd promised them. That was the day he'd force Emily's hand. And that was the day I would strike. Mark thought humiliating me on a porch was enough to break me. But all he'd done was show me exactly where to hit him hardest. Every man has a limit. Mark thought humiliating me on my daughter's porch meant the fight was over. He didn't understand patience. He didn't understand how slow, steady pressure can break a man into pieces. By the time I finished pinning photos and bank printouts to the wall above my desk, the place looked like a conspiracy board in an old detective movie: red string, sticky notes, arrows, numbers. My handwriting crawled across the margins like a warning. At the center, pinned with a thumbtack that pushed through hard, was Emily's graduation photo, the innocent face I swore I'd protect. The board gave me purpose. The paper trail gave me leverage. But lever and leverage are nothing without timing. Mark's bravado had always been loud. Loud men make better targets. They speak too much when they think they're safe. So I listened. I learned his patterns: O'Malley's on Tuesdays and Fridays, the warehouse by the river on Thursdays, the cafe at midnight when the suits came through. He relied on routine because routine made him feel untouchable. It made him careless. The surveillance started small and messy and got better as the nights stretched. I sat in my truck until my back cramped, the heater on low so my breath fogged the glass. I learned to laugh at myself for the things I missed: a license plate I couldn't read, a muffled phrase, then sharpened my approach the next time. I bought a better recorder, a cheap camera I mounted in the alley near the bar, and I started keeping a running log. Time, place, breath, movement. Everything notated like a ledger of a man's decline. One damp Tuesday, Mark left O'Malley's with a swagger that was more fear than confidence. He argued into his phone, the headlights of my parked truck cutting across his face for a second before his silhouette swallowed him. I sat in the dark and listened. He shouted, "I told you, Friday. She signs. You'll get the rest after that." The last words were cut off, but the tone was desperate, raw enough to make a man shiver. I wrote it down: Friday, deadline, escalate. That same week I moved my watching points: the cafe downtown where Mark met the suited men, the industrial strip where the warehouse traded favors at night, and a pawnbroker 2 blocks over who always took cash for name-brand things. I learned the rhythm of his desperation. He pawned watches at 3 a.m. He bought rounds for men with too much cash and too little conscience. He smiled like a man who'd pay later with promises, and promises are the currency of a failing man. I made new allies: Harold at the bank who could nudge a ledger without getting caught in the weeds, Lisa at O'Malley's who knew the shifts and who sat where, even an apprentice at Mark's garage who liked to gossip when the work was quiet. We coordinated with notes, with subtle signals. Mike, bless him, agreed to meet Mark under the pretense of being an investor and to bait his mouth into confession. Every contact gave me another thread to pull. There were nights when it felt like nothing moved. Files stacked on my kitchen table, paper by paper, and the town went on with its banal rhythms: kids on bikes, women with grocery bags, old men at the diner. That normalcy was the mask I hated the most. It let Mark breathe in plain sight. It allowed him to speak of me in the back rooms and in the dark alleys, to tell anyone who would listen that I was jealous, obsessed, unstable. The petty poison spread. My name was smeared over whispered pints. I remember one particular night that sharpened everything into focus. It rained hard, the kind of cold rain that goes through shoes and into your bones. I sat across the street from the cafe with the wipers barely moving, watching Mark slip in under the awning with 2 men who looked like they carried problems in tailored suits. They sat in the corner booth, voices low. I parked a block further and walked, slow, unhurried, a man with nothing to hide walking with purpose. From the alley, hidden by steam from a vent, I watched one of the suit's hands pass an envelope and Mark's hand close around it like a prize. He zipped it inside his jacket, and for a second the light caught the fold of paper like a confession. The next morning Harold called. He'd pulled some flagged transfers and traced a chain of accounts. It's not huge sums at first, he told me, but it's consistent. Small outflows here, consolidations there, and a link to an account that's been moving money offshore. He said it like a man describing weather, but I heard hurricane in his voice. If you keep watching, you'll see him pay someone who can make that link look independent. They'll launder the appearance, move numbers to make it look like a business expense. But numbers lie to those who don't read them properly. Follow the chains, and you find names. We followed. We logged. On Thursday, I tailed Mark to the warehouse again. He drove slower than usual, shoulders hunched, the weight of sleepless nights in the angle of his jaw. In the dark, 2 men stepped out and greeted him like he was owed something. They exchanged hands, a business as old as crooked promises. A bill passed. A phone changed numbers. The little recorder in my shirt caught laughter and a phrase that would stitch itself into his unraveling. She signs, you get out clean. By then, I'd stopped hoping to change Mark's heart. That wasn't the fight anymore. This was damage control. This was pulling my daughter out from under a man who was slowly building a trap and masking it as care. If Emily had to be shown, she would be shown with facts that couldn't be soothed with a hug or a softer word. Papers. Numbers. Witnesses. The ugly, undeniable stuff that spoke louder than his silvery talk. As Friday approached, I felt the pressure build in my chest. The house felt different, the kind of quiet that waits for something to snap, and Emily's image on my board somehow looked more fragile. I scrubbed my notes clean, reorganized every page, made timelines and cross-references. I rehearsed what I would do, the right moment to present the facts, the right witnesses to bring, and the way to keep myself from losing the one thing I could never get back if I acted out of anger, my daughter's trust. I called Emily twice in those last days. Each time she answered with code, tired, non-committal, the small evasions of someone who had been coached. Once she put the phone down, and I could hear Mark's voice in the background, soft and cajoling. Just tell him it's not a good time, he murmured, and I heard the way she obeyed. It twisted me into a knot. He had already taken so much of her voice that when she spoke, part of it belonged to him. On Thursday night, he left the house furious. I watched from my truck as he paced the driveway, crumpling papers, swearing under his breath. He got into his truck and drove off with more rage than sense. I followed 2 blocks back, keeping distance, my headlights low. He turned to the warehouse, and I watched him go in like a man walking into the lair of whatever demons he'd borrowed. I slept little that night. Dawn came cold and bright. My hand hovered over the phone a dozen times. Finally, I dialed Harold. If he moves anything today, I said, I want everything frozen. Subpoena whatever you can. Make it official. Harold's voice was a calm machine. If they do, we'll pull the threads. Be ready, Paul. The plan was set. Friday would force a hand. Either Mark would get what he needed, or he'd crack. And when he cracked, he'd leave the pieces for me to pick up, the signed forms, the bank stamps, the guys who sold him confidence for cash. He'd built a house of cards using my daughter's name as ballast. I intended to topple it. That evening, I pinned another printed bank statement to the wall, underlining the smallest transfer with a red pen until the mark became a wound. I traced the route with my finger, from local account to offshore string, noting the dates that matched warehouse visits, the nights he'd been drinking too loud, the times he told men he'd take care of it. Every line tightened the net. Mark had thought the struggle was over when he played me off on the porch. He'd smiled thinking he'd won. He didn't understand that humiliation is a poor victory. It merely pushes a man into the anonymity of the emboldened. He'd underestimated that an old man with nothing left to lose learns patience. He didn't know I could wait until the smallest detail unraveled the whole thing. Friday came, rain like needles, and I sat in my car until noon, hands numb from the cold and the pen I had been chewing on. Around 3, a flurry of calls came to my phone, Harold breathless. They moved it. The transfer chain went through. But Paul, there's a snag. The last account auto-flagged because of international monitoring. We can trace it. We can get names. We can start subpoenas. Ready? I felt the lift in my chest like wind under a sail. Ready, I said. That night, I slept for an hour and dreamed about the board above my desk. The red strings glowed, and somewhere in the tangle a bright white thread began to show, a path that would lead straight through Mark's lies. I woke with clarity that felt like a match lit in the dark. The breaking point was no longer a threat, it was a plan about to be executed. And in the morning I would move. Not to shout. Not to shame. To show, in a way that even the smoothest liar could not spin away, the truth. There comes a moment when the lies collapse under their own weight. For Mark, that moment came on a Friday he thought he'd win, but instead, it was the day his whole world caved in. Friday arrived like a storm. The air was heavy, the sky the color of wet cement. I'd been awake since before dawn, pacing the kitchen, replaying the plan in my head. This wasn't going to be a shouting match on a porch, or whispered accusations in a bar. This was going to be exposure, undeniable, irreversible. Harold called at noon. It's happening, he said. Transfers flagged. The last account bounced. Paul, this is it. My heart hammered. Good. Keep the files clean. I'll handle the rest. That evening, I drove to Emily's house. The lights were on. Through the window, I saw her at the table with papers spread out, her brow furrowed. Mark stood over her, voice sharp, jabbing at the page with a finger. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. I'd seen that posture 100 times in men like him, cornered, desperate, forcing his will on someone weaker. I rang the bell. Emily flinched when she saw me on the porch. Dad, please. Emily, I said, steady but firm. I need you to hear me. Just once more. 5 minutes. No more. Mark appeared behind her, his face twisted into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. What are you doing here, old man? Didn't I make it clear you're not wanted? I didn't rise to it. I pulled a folder from under my jacket and laid it flat on the porch railing. Then explain this. I opened it. Bank records. Loan applications. Copies of signatures. And on top, a transcript from the recorder, his own words. Mark's smirk faltered. Emily's eyes widened as she leaned forward. She saw her signature on loan after loan, documents she didn't remember signing, debts she didn't know she owed. Her voice trembled. Mark, what is this? He stammered. It's business, Emily. You don't understand how these things work. I was protecting us. I pressed play on the recorder. His voice filled the porch. Once she signs the last form, it's done. House, car, all in my name. Old man's too nosy, but I've got him sidelined. Emily's face went pale. She covered her mouth with a shaking hand. Tears welled in her eyes. Is that protecting her? I asked quietly. Or is that using her? Mark's mask cracked. His eyes darted between me, Emily, and the papers. He stepped forward, voice rising. He set me up. He's twisting this. But Emily stepped back from him. Stop! She cried. That's your voice, Mark? Those are my signatures. You lied to me. You've been lying all along. For the first time, he had no comeback. He just stood there, breathing hard, the sweat beading on his brow. I gathered the papers, tucking them back into the folder. I've already passed copies to the bank and to people who know what to do with them. This isn't just about family anymore. This is legal. You're finished. Mark's jaw clenched. For a second, I thought he might lunge at me. But instead, he turned on his heel and stormed inside, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. Emily stood frozen on the porch, tears spilling freely now. Dad? I didn't know. I swear I didn't. I placed a hand gently on her shoulder. I know, baby. I know. None of this is your fault. For the first time in months, she let herself collapse into my arms. I held her as she sobbed, her body trembling against mine. The war was over. Not with fists, not with rage, but with patience, with truth, with the slow, steady hand of a father who refused to let go. And as I stood there, holding my daughter in the rain, I knew one thing for certain: Mark had underestimated me. And that mistake had cost him everything. That was my story. Now I'd like to hear yours. Share it in the comments below.